I rented the cabin because it was cheap and far away from everything, and I needed that. I had been tired for a long time, tired in a way that sleep in my own bed did not fix. The listing showed a small wooden cabin in the hills, one road in, trees all around, no neighbors in sight. It promised quiet, and that was enough for me. I packed food for a week, filled the gas tank, and drove for hours until the signal on my phone dropped to nothing. That should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt like being cut loose. The road to the cabin was narrow and rough, with deep ruts and loose stones. Branches scraped the sides of my car. The trees grew so close that the light changed as I drove, turning green and dim like I was underwater. When I finally reached the clearing, the cabin looked smaller than in the photos. The wood was dark and weathered. The porch leaned a little to the left. There were old boot prints pressed into the dirt near the steps, not sharp but not fully washed away either. I told myself that the owner must have been there recently. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust, old wood, and something faintly sour. There was one main room, a small kitchen corner, a table, and a couch that sagged in the middle. A narrow hallway led to a bedroom and a bathroom. The windows were small and cloudy. When I set my bag down, the sound felt too loud, like the walls were closer than they should be. I walked through every room, checking corners and closets out of habit. Everything seemed normal, just worn and quiet. The first night passed without much trouble. The wind moved through the trees and made the cabin creak. I expected that. I cooked a simple meal, ate at the table, and went to bed early. The mattress was thin, and I could feel the wooden frame under it. I lay there listening, counting the sounds I could explain. Wind, branches, the settling of old wood. When I finally slept, it was shallow and broken. The second day, I explored the area around the cabin. There was a narrow trail behind it that led downhill toward a dry creek bed. I noticed more boot prints there, deeper this time, heading both directions. Some were newer than others. I also noticed that the prints did not match the ones near the porch. Different tread, different size. I felt a small tightness in my chest, but I told myself people hike out here. This was not private land in the strict sense. Still, I stayed close to the cabin after that. That afternoon, I found something else. Behind the cabin, partly hidden by brush, was a stack of old boards and a blue tarp weighed down by rocks. I did not touch it. I stood there looking at it longer than I meant to, trying to decide if it belonged to the cabin or not. The tarp looked newer than everything else around it. The blue stood out too much against the brown and green. I went back inside and shut the door harder than necessary. That night, I woke up because something felt wrong. Not a sound exactly, but a change. The air felt heavier. I lay still, listening. After a long moment, I heard it. Slow movement outside, not like an animal. The steps were spaced too evenly. They circled the cabin, stopping near the windows. I could hear breathing through the thin glass, soft but close. I stayed frozen, barely breathing myself. The steps moved to the porch. The wood creaked under weight. A shadow passed in front of the small window near the door. I do not know how long it lasted. It could have been minutes or an hour. Eventually, the steps moved away, fading into the trees. I did not sleep after that. When morning came, the light felt weak and gray. I checked the door and saw fresh dirt on the porch boards, small clumps that had not been there before. One of the windows had a smear on it, like someone had leaned close. I wanted to leave right then, but the car did not start. The engine turned once and died. I tried again and got nothing but a clicking sound. I checked under the hood, even though I know little about cars. One of the hoses had been cut clean through. It was not torn or chewed, it was sliced. My hands shook as I closed the hood. The rest of the day dragged on. I stayed inside with the door locked, moving quietly. I noticed things I had missed before. The bathroom window latch was loose, like it had been forced and then pushed back. The bedroom closet smelled stronger than the rest of the cabin, that sour smell from before. When I opened it, I found old food wrappers crushed and stuffed behind a loose board. Someone had been using the space not long ago. As night came again, the fear settled deeper. I gathered what I could use for protection, a heavy flashlight, a kitchen knife, even though I knew how useless that really was. I sat in the main room with the lights off, using only the dim glow from the moon through the window. My ears strained for every sound. The wind picked up, and with it, the steps returned.
This time they did not circle. They went straight to the back of the cabin. I heard the scrape of metal against wood. The loose bathroom window latch rattled. I moved slowly towards the hallway, every muscle tight. The window pushed inward a little, then stopped. Whoever was there must have realized it would not open easily. The steps moved again, closer to the bedroom. The floorboard outside the bedroom door creaked. I felt the vibration through the floor. The closet door shuddered slightly, like someone pressed against the wall behind it. I realized then that the person had been inside the cabin before, learning it, using it. I backed away towards the front door, moving one careful step at a time. The door handle turned once. It did not open. The lock held. The turning stopped, and for a long moment there was nothing. Then the smell hit me stronger than before, sweat and dirt and something rotten. I knew then that staying silent was not saving me. The front window shattered inward suddenly, glass spraying across the floor. I ran. I do not remember every step clearly. I remember the pain in my feet as I ran into the woods without shoes. I remember branches tearing at my skin. I remember falling and getting back up. I ran downhill toward the creek bed because I remembered the trail. The ground was uneven and slick, but I did not slow down. Behind me I heard crashing and heavy breathing, closer than it should have been. I reached the road eventually, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. A truck came into view, headlights cutting through the trees. I ran into the road without thinking. The truck stopped in time. I collapsed there, shaking so hard I could not stand. Later, after I was safe, authorities went back to the cabin. They found the tarp behind it covered a shallow pit. They found tools inside the cabin that did not belong to the owner. They found signs that someone had been living there for months, using the cabin as a place to watch people who rented it. They never told me everything they found, and I did not ask.
I left the area the next day. I still think about that place sometimes, about how close I came to never leaving. The cabin is gone now. It was torn down, burned, and cleared. But I know that fear does not belong to the wood or the land. It belongs to the fact that someone was there, watching, waiting, and almost succeeded. I went to the cabin because I wanted quiet. I told myself it was just a few days away from the noise, the screens, the feeling that every hour was already owned by someone else. The cabin sat deep in state land, far enough that my phone lost signal a mile before the dirt road ended. I parked beside a leaning shed and walked the last stretch because the road was half mud and half ice. The trees pressed in tight, all pine and wet bark, the ground dark with old needles. The air smelled cold and old, like metal and sap. The cabin looked solid at first. One story, rough logs, a low roof with a sag in the middle. The windows were small and thick with dust. The door stuck when I pulled it open, then gave way with a dry sound like breaking bread. Inside, it was colder than outside somehow. The place had that heavy stillness you only feel where nothing has moved for a long time. There was a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, a wood stove, and shelves with old cans and tools. Everything was coated in a fine layer of grime. No power, no running water, just a hand pump out back and a stack of firewood under a tarp. I spent the first hour cleaning, sweeping pine needles and mouse droppings into a pile. I checked the stovepipe for blockages and tested the door latch. It worked, but only if you lifted and pushed at the same time. The windows did not open. They were nailed shut, which felt strange but not impossible to explain. Maybe the owner did not want animals getting in during winter. I unpacked my food and gear and set my bag by the bed. When I finally sat down, the quiet felt thick enough to lean on. That night came early. The forest went black and layers, shadows stacking on shadows. The wind moved through the trees in slow waves. I lit the stove and fed it until the cabin warmed. The fire popped and settled. I ate and lay on the bed listening to the small sounds of the place, the wood expanding, the wind finding gaps. I slept deep and heavy. The second day was when things started to feel wrong. It was small at first. I noticed the wood pile looked different, like it had been disturbed. The tarp was folded back more than I remembered. I told myself I probably moved it without thinking. I walked a loop around the cabin and saw footprints near the pump. They were not fresh, but they were not old either. The snow had not fallen in days, so timing was hard to judge. I compared them to my boots. They were similar in size, but not the same pattern. I felt a small pinch of unease, but I pushed it down. Inside, I found the shelves had been shifted. A can that had been on its side now stood upright. Again, it could have been me. Memory is slippery, especially when you want peace. I spent the afternoon chopping wood and hauling water. The sky stayed gray and low. By late afternoon, the light flattened and the forest felt closer. That night, the wind picked up. It rattled the roof and pressed against the walls. I fed the stove and lay awake longer than the night before. At some point, I smelled something sharp and sour. Not smoke, something else. It came and went. I checked the stove and the pipe. Everything looked fine. I opened the door for fresh air and stood on the threshold. The forest was loud with wind, but underneath it there was a sense of weight, like being watched. I closed the door and latched it. I woke up before dawn with my heart racing. The cabin was quiet in a way that felt wrong, like the world had stopped breathing. I sat up and listened. Nothing. When I stood, I saw the door latch was lifted. The door was still closed, but the latch was not set the way I left it. My mouth went dry. I checked the windows. Still nailed shut. I checked my bag. Nothing missing. The stove was cold, the ash undisturbed. I stood there, trying to make my fear smaller by explaining it away. The third day, the smell came back, stronger. It was chemical, like fuel and rot. I traced it to a loose floorboard near the stove. When I pried it up, I found a shallow crawl space. Inside were rags, empty containers, and a plastic jug with a cracked cap. I did not touch it. The smell burned my nose. I put the board back and opened the door again. My head felt light. I sat down until it passed. That was when I noticed the marks on the door frame, shallow lines cut into the wood at about shoulder height. They were old but deliberate. There were more on the inside wall near the bed, faint but there. Someone had measured time here, or something else. The idea that this cabin had not been empty the way I thought it was settled into me like a stone. As the light faded, I heard movement outside, not the wind. It was a steady crunch, slow and close. It circled the cabin once. I stood by the table, holding my breath. The sound stopped near the back wall. I waited for it to move away. It did not. Minutes passed. Then I heard a soft scrape against the logs, like someone testing the surface. I did not move. I did not breathe. Eventually, the sound drifted off into the trees. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, watching the door. The stove stayed cold because I did not want the light or the smell. My thoughts ran in tight circles. I told myself that in the morning I would leave. I counted the hours by the light creeping through the dirty window. When morning came, the ground outside was marked with fresh prints. They came close to the walls, close enough to touch. They were not mine. They led away toward the trees, then back again. I packed in a hurry, my hands clumsy. When I lifted my bag, I felt a tug. A thin wire was looped through the strap and anchored to the bed frame. It was almost invisible against the wood. If I had pulled harder, it would have snapped tight. I stared at it, my legs weak. The wire led under the bed and into the crawl space. That was when the truth settled in fully. This place was not abandoned. Someone used it. Someone expected privacy and had made sure of it. The nails in the windows, the latch that needed a trick, the wire, the smell was not an accident. It was a warning or a mistake that had almost made me sick. I cut the wire with my knife and shouldered my bag. I did not run. I walked fast and steady, eyes on the trees. The forest felt different now, every trunk a hiding place. I did not look back until I reached the shed and my car. The tires were intact. I drove the road without stopping, sliding in the mud, heart pounding until the signal bars came back on my phone. I reported the cabin and what I found to the ranger station later that day. They took it seriously. Weeks later, I learned they found evidence of illegal storage and traps and signs someone had been living nearby. They closed the cabin and posted warnings. I never went back. I still think about how close I came to staying one more night, how easy it was to believe in peace when danger was quiet and patient. The ending was clear to me after that. I wanted quiet, and I got it, but only because I left before the forest decided I belonged to it. I drove out to the cabin because I wanted to be alone for a few days. That was the whole reason. No phone service, no people, no noise except wind and trees. The cabin belonged to my uncle years ago, and after he passed it, just sat there. It was deep in the woods, far from the nearest town, and the last stretch of road was nothing but dirt and rocks. By the time I arrived, my arms were sore from gripping the steering wheel, and my nerves already felt thin. The cabin looked the same as I remembered from childhood, but older. The wood siding had gone gray and rough. The porch sagged slightly in the middle. Leaves were piled against the steps, damp and rotting. I noticed right away that the padlock on the door was gone. I told myself it probably rusted off or my uncle removed it years ago. Still, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Inside, the air smelled like dust, old wood, and something faintly sour. I opened the windows to let light in. The furniture was still there, a small table, 2 chairs, a couch with flattened cushions, and the iron stove in the corner. There were mouse droppings on the floor and a few dead bugs near the window sills. Nothing unexpected, nothing dangerous. I kept telling myself that. I unpacked slowly, putting my food in a cooler and stacking firewood by the stove. I noticed small things that felt off, but not enough to panic. A cupboard door hung open, even though I was sure I closed it. One of the chairs was pulled slightly away from the table. I blamed my memory. I blamed the drive. I blamed my own imagination. That night, the woods felt louder than I remembered. The wind moved through the trees in uneven waves, sometimes quiet, sometimes strong enough to make branches scrape against the roof. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, listening. Every crack and pop of the old cabin made my body tense. I eventually fell asleep, but not deeply. In the morning, I found muddy footprints near the back of the cabin. They were not animal tracks. They were long, narrow, and uneven, like someone wearing worn boots. They led from the tree line to the back wall and stopped there. No prints leading away. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the dirt, trying to find a normal explanation. A hunter, a hiker, someone lost. Anyone but someone who stayed. I checked the windows. All were locked from the inside. The back door was still bolted. That made me feel worse, not better. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I cleaned, swept, organized supplies, chopped more wood than I needed. Every few minutes I caught myself listening, holding still, waiting for a sound that never came. The woods were too quiet at times, like everything was holding its breath. That evening, I noticed food was missing, just a small amount, a few protein bars. I counted again and again, hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. The cooler was still closed properly, no signs of animals. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. I slept with a knife beside the bed that night. I hated myself for it, but I did it anyway. Sometime before dawn, I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but from a feeling. The air felt wrong, heavy. I could hear breathing that wasn't mine. It was slow and controlled, coming from somewhere inside the cabin. I stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like hours, the sound stopped. I never heard footsteps. I never heard a door open or close. When morning came, the front door was unlocked. I didn't leave right away. That decision still bothers me. I think part of me needed proof. I walked the perimeter of the cabin and found more signs. A flattened patch of grass near the side wall. A cigarette butt half buried in the dirt. I don't smoke. No one I know does. The realization settled in slowly and heavily. Someone was staying here with me, or had been, and they knew how to stay hidden. I packed my things quickly. My hands shook so badly, dropped my keys twice. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed something carved into the underside of the railing. It was shallow, like it was done with a pocket knife. Just lines. Tiles. Dozens of them. I froze. The marks were old and new mixed together. Some were darkened with age, others pale and fresh. I didn't count them. I didn't want to. As I turned to leave, I saw movement in the trees. Not fast, not dramatic, just a shift. A human shape stepping back, deeper into the woods. I never saw a face. I never heard a sound. But I knew without doubt that I was being watched and that whoever it was had been close to me for days. I didn't run.
I walked as calmly as I could to my car. I didn't look back. The drive out felt endless. Every bump made me flinch. Every shadow felt like pursuit. When I finally reached the paved road, I pulled over and sat there shaking, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. I reported everything later. The footprints, the missing food, the carvings. Authorities searched the area but found nothing conclusive. No one ever followed up with me. Life moved on as it always does. I never went back to that cabin. Months later, I learned it burned down in a wildfire. Total loss. When I heard that, I felt relief instead of sadness. Whatever history was carved into that wood, whatever patterns of watching and waiting existed there, were finally gone. I still think about it sometimes. Not as a mystery, but as a warning. There are places where isolation doesn't mean being alone. There are spaces where someone can learn your routines, your habits, your fears without you ever seeing them. I was lucky. I left when I did. And I never again confused silence with safety.
I rented the cabin because I wanted to be alone and because it was cheap. It sat at the end of a long dirt road that cut through thick pine trees, the kind that block sound and light. The listing said it was remote but safe, recently cleaned, stocked with firewood, and used by hunters in the fall. It was late November, just before the real snow started, and I told myself that silence would be good for me. I had taken time off work and packed enough food for a week. I wanted to sleep, read, and let my head slow down. The drive there took longer than I expected. The road narrowed until branches scraped the sides of my car. Fallen needles covered the ground like a wet carpet. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than the pictures. It was a single-story wooden place with a metal roof, a small porch, and one window on each side. No other buildings were visible. The woods wrapped around it tightly, like they were trying to swallow it. There was no fence, no clear yard, just trees starting a few feet from the walls. Inside, the air smelled old, but not rotten. It smelled like dust, cold wood, and something faintly sour, like damp clothes that never fully dried. The floorboards creaked under my boots. There was a couch with faded fabric, a small table, a kitchenette, and a narrow hallway leading to a bathroom and one bedroom. Everything looked normal at first glance, too normal. Clean in a way that felt rushed, like someone had wiped surfaces but not really looked at them. I unpacked slowly, taking my time. The silence was heavy. No wind, no birds, no distant cars. Just my own movement and breathing. When I opened the fridge, it hummed loudly, the sound echoing off the walls. I noticed the lock on the front door was newer than the rest of the hardware. The screws were shiny, the metal unmarked. I told myself it meant the owner cared about safety. That first night, I slept badly. The bed was stiff and the quiet felt loud. Every small noise stood out. The house settled, wood popping as the temperature dropped. I kept waking up with the feeling that I had missed a sound, like my brain was waiting for something it could not name. When morning came, the light through the window was gray and weak. I spent the next day walking the nearby woods. There were no trails, just uneven ground and fallen branches. I noticed old footprints in the mud near the back of the cabin. They were not mine. The tread pattern was different. They looked recent, pressed deep, as if the ground had been soft. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at them, trying to tell myself they were from hunters or maintenance workers. I did not see any other signs of people. No trash, no tire marks beyond the main road. Back inside, I tried to distract myself. I cooked a simple meal, read a few chapters of a book, and wrote notes in a journal. The feeling did not leave. It stayed low and steady, like pressure behind my eyes. That night, I noticed the bathroom window was unlocked. I was sure I had checked it before. I locked it and tested it twice. On the third day, I found something that changed the way the cabin felt forever. I was looking for extra blankets in a small storage closet near the bedroom. Behind a stack of old boxes, I saw a narrow gap in the wall. It was not supposed to be there. I pushed one of the boxes aside and found a loose wooden panel. The wood was darker than the rest, worn smooth by touch. When I pressed it, it shifted inward slightly. I did not open it right away. I stood there, heart beating hard, listening. The cabin was still silent. Finally, I pulled the panel free.
Behind it was a shallow space between the walls, just wide enough for someone to crouch. Inside, I saw flattened insulation crushed like it had been pressed down again and again. There were small items scattered inside. A water bottle, empty. Food wrappers, a folded jacket that smelled sour and human. The smell hit me all at once, sharp and undeniable. My hands shook as he put the panel back. I cleaned nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the door. My thoughts raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Someone had been there. Maybe someone still was. The idea settled in my chest and made it hard to breathe. I checked every room carefully after that. I noticed things I had missed before. Scratches on the inside of the hallway wall, low and uneven. A small dark stain near the back door that did not look like rust. The pantry shelf was missing a can of food. I was sure I had packed. My head tried to explain it away, but my body knew better. That night, I did not sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights off, holding my keys and listening. Hours passed slowly. Sometime after midnight, I heard it, a soft sound from inside the walls. Not the house settling. Not the wind. A slow, careful movement, like fabric brushing against wood. It came from the hallway. I stayed completely still. My heart was loud in my ears. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. I did not look toward it. I focused on breathing quietly, evenly. The fridge clicked on, filling the room with noise, and the sound in the walls stopped again. When morning finally came, I waited until full daylight before moving. I packed fast, throwing things into my bag without caring how they fit. When I opened the front door, cold air rushed in. I stepped outside and froze. Near the porch, fresh footprints marked the ground. They circled the cabin. They came close to the windows. They did not go toward the road. I did not go back inside. I got into my car and drove. The road felt longer on the way out. Every shadow between the trees looked like a person standing still. When I reached a place with signal, I did not stop. I drove until I reached a town with people, noise, and light. Later, after I reported everything to the authorities, they searched the cabin. They found more spaces in the walls. They found personal items that did not belong to me. They told me the cabin had been used before by someone who lived there without permission, hiding, watching, leaving, and returning. No one ever found the person. The owner took the place off the market. I went home and tried to return to normal life, but the cabin followed me. I still noticed locks first. I still listen to walls. I understand now how easy it is for someone to be close without being seen. The fear was not of something unreal or impossible. It was the fear of another person choosing to stay hidden, close enough to hear me breathe, and waiting for the right moment that never came because I left when I did.
I went to the cabin because I wanted to be alone, and because I believed being alone would fix something in me. The place sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest paved road. The drive there took longer than expected. The last stretch was nothing but dirt, rocks, and old tire ruts that looked like they had not been used in years. Tall trees crowded both sides, blocking most of the sky. By the time I arrived, the sun was already low, and everything had a dull orange color that made the woods feel thicker and heavier. The cabin was smaller than I remembered from the photos online. One floor, old wood, faded green paint peeling off in long strips. The porch sagged slightly in the middle, like it had learned to bend instead of breaking. There was no fence, no other buildings, no sign that anyone else came out here often. Just trees, brush, and a narrow clearing that looked more like something nature tolerated rather than allowed. When I unlocked the door, the smell hit me first. Old wood, dust, something damp that never fully dries. Inside, it was darker than I expected, even with the windows. The glass was cloudy and scratched, and the light barely came through. The place was quiet in a way that made my ears ring. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, no voices. Just the sound of my boots on the floor and my own breathing. I spent the first hour unpacking and cleaning. I wiped down the table, swept the floor, checked the small kitchen area. Everything worked, technically. The stove lit, the sink ran cold water from a tank outside, and the bathroom had a weak but steady flush. There was a small bedroom in the back with a narrow bed and a thin mattress that smelled like fabric softener trying to cover something older. As night came, the woods changed. During the day, there were birds and insects and small sounds that blended together. At night, those sounds thinned out. Some stopped completely. Others became sharper. A branch snapping somewhere far away. Leaves shifting without wind. The kind of noises that make you pause and listen even when you tell yourself it is normal. I locked the door before bed, even though I knew it was pointless. The lock was old, the frame soft. Anyone who wanted to get in could. Still, the sound of the latch sliding into place made me feel slightly better. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move as clouds passed over the moon. Sleep came slow and uneven. I woke up in the middle of the night to silence that felt wrong. Not peaceful, not calm, empty. I listened, waiting for the normal night sounds to return. They didn't. My mouth felt dry, and my chest was tight for no clear reason. I stayed still for a long time, convincing myself I was just not used to being out here. In the morning, I stepped outside and noticed something that made my stomach drop. My car was closer to the cabin than I remembered parking it. At first, I told myself I misjudged the distance in the dark, but the ground behind the tires showed fresh marks, like it had been rolled forward. The dirt was disturbed in a way that didn't match the rest of the clearing. I walked around the car slowly. Nothing else looked damaged. No broken glass. No missing items. But the feeling stuck with me. I checked the trail leading to the road. The tire marks were faint but visible, overlapping older ones. It looked like someone had walked there recently too. The footprints were not clear enough to see size or shape, but they were there. I spent the rest of the day trying to stay busy. I explored the area around the cabin, staying within sight of it. The woods felt different now, closer, like the trees leaned in more than before. Every time I stopped moving, I felt watched, even though I never saw anyone. I told myself it was just my nerves feeding on the quiet. That night, I heard footsteps. They were slow and heavy, not the light sound of an animal. They circled the cabin once, crushing leaves and snapping twigs. I stayed on the bed, barely breathing. The steps stopped near the front door. There was a long pause. Then they moved away again, disappearing into the trees. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, there were deep footprints around the cabin. Clear this time. Adult-sized. Boot prints. They came close to every window, right up to the door. I found scratches on the wood near the handle, like someone tested it. Not hard enough to break it, just enough to see if it would give. I decided to leave. I packed fast, shoving things into my bag without care. When I went to start the car, it didn't turn over. The engine clicked once, then nothing. I opened the hood, even though I knew nothing about cars. A wire had been pulled loose, cleanly, not chewed, not broken by age, pulled. My hands shook as I pushed it back into place and tried again. The engine started, rough but alive. I didn't wait. I drove straight down the dirt road, faster than I should have, not caring about the damage to the tires or suspension. Halfway down the road, a tree blocked the path, not fallen naturally. Cut, fresh wood exposed, Zapstillvet. I stopped the car, heart pounding. I looked around, scanning the trees, the brush, the shadows. Nothing moved. I sat there for a long time, weighing my options. Turning around meant going back to the cabin. Moving the tree meant stepping out into the open. Staying meant waiting, and waiting felt like the worst choice of all. I got out of the car. The woods were silent again. Too silent. I worked fast, dragging branches away, straining my muscles, feeling exposed with every second. When the path was clear enough, I got back in and drove without looking back. I reached the main road as the sun was setting. The sight of pavement felt unreal, like some things I imagined. I drove straight to the nearest town and went to a busy gas station. I stayed there for a long time, surrounded by people, lights, noise. I felt like I had escaped something I didn't fully understand. Later, I reported everything. The cabin owner said no one else should have been out there. The local police took notes and promised to check the area. I never heard back. Weeks later, I looked up the cabin listing. It was gone. Not marked as rented or unavailable. Just gone, like it never existed. I stopped looking after that.
I know someone was out there. I know they moved my car, walked around my cabin at night, blocked the road, and waited.
I don't know why they didn't come inside. I don't know if they planned to. What I do know is that the woods didn't feel empty because they were lonely. They felt empty because someone else knew how to be quiet there. I don't go into remote places anymore. Not because I believe in anything unreal, but because I learned something very simple and very clear. There are places where help cannot reach you fast enough, and there are people who understand that. I was lucky enough to leave. Someone else might not be. I rented the cabin because I wanted to be alone. I told myself it was for rest, for quiet, for clearing my head. The truth was simpler. I was tired of people and noise and screens. I wanted a place where nothing expected anything from me. The cabin sat deep in the woods, far from town, far from cell service, far from any help if something went wrong. I knew that when I booked it. I even liked that part. The road leading to it was narrow and rough. My car shook the whole way, tires crunching over gravel and dry leaves. Trees pressed in from both sides, tall and thick, blocking the sky. The cabin looked older than the photos online. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was already low. The wood was dark and uneven. The roof sagged a little in the middle, and the windows reflected the trees instead of the light. It felt less like a place someone owned and more like something that had been forgotten. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood. The floor creaked under every step. There was a small kitchen, a table, one chair, and a couch that had lost its shape years ago. The bedroom was just big enough for the bed. No decorations, no pictures, nothing personnel. It felt empty in a way that was not comforting. Still, I unpacked my bag, stacked canned food on the counter, and set my flashlight by the bed. I noticed there was no lock on the bedroom door, only on the front door, and even that one felt loose. Night came fast. The woods grew dark in layers, shadows piling on top of each other. Outside, sounds began to rise. Wind moved through branches. Leaves scraped against the cabin walls. Somewhere far off, an animal moved through brush. None of it was strange, but the way it all mixed together made it hard to tell what was close and what was not. I sat on the couch with a book but could not focus. My eyes kept lifting to the window. At some point, I noticed something small that bothered me. One of the windows in the kitchen had a smear on it, like a hand had been pressed there and dragged down. I told myself it was old, maybe from when the place was cleaned or repaired. Still, I wiped it with a towel. The smear did not fully come off. It had soaked into the glass somehow. I went to bed earlier than planned. The mattress was thin, and every movement made noise. The cabin settled as the temperature dropped, wood popping and shifting. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. My mind kept trying to turn normal sounds into something else. I forced myself to breathe slow and steady. Sometime into night, I woke up for no clear reason. The room was pitch black. The air felt different, heavier. I stayed still, listening. At first there was nothing. Then I heard it, a sound outside, close to the cabin. Slow footsteps on dirt. They stopped near the front wall. I waited for them to move away. They did not. The steps came again, softer this time, circling. I could tell by the sound that it was a person, not an animal. The steps were too even, too careful. My chest tightened. I stayed quiet, barely breathing. The sound reached the side of the cabin, then the back. I heard something brush against the wall, like fingers dragging across the wood. I told myself it could be someone lost, someone passing through, but deep down, I knew that was not true. No one just wandered this far out at night. No one circled a cabin like that by accident. The steps stopped near the kitchen window. He heard a light tap against the glass. Not hard enough to break it, just enough to test it. My hands shook as I reached for the flashlight. I kept it off. Light would only show where I was. Minutes passed. My legs began to ache from staying still. Then I heard the front door handle move. Slowly, gently. The loose lock rattled but held. Whoever was outside did not pull hard. They seemed to understand how weak it was. I realized then that this was not random. Someone knew this cabin. Someone knew it was empty sometimes. Someone knew it was easy.
The handle stopped moving. I waited for the sound of breaking wood, but it never came. Instead, the steps returned, heading toward the back of the cabin, then the side, then they faded into the woods. I did not sleep again that night. When morning came, pale and cold, I finally stood up. My whole body felt sore. I checked the cabin slowly, room by room. Nothing inside was disturbed. Outside, though, I found clear footprints in the dirt, boot prints. Lager. Fresh. They circled the cabin more than once. I packed my things right away. I told myself I was leaving, that this was enough. But as I loaded my car, I noticed something else. Near the tree line, partly hidden behind a fallen log, there was trash, food wrappers, empty bottles. Someone had been staying out there, watching. The road out felt longer than before. Every turn made me tense. He kept checking the mirrors. I did not relax until I reached the main road and saw other cars. Weeks later, back home, I tried to forget it. I told myself nothing really happened, but then a small package arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was my flashlight, the same one I had left on the bed in the cabin, wrapped carefully in a dirty cloth. I moved after that. I changed my number. I stopped going places alone. I never rented another cabin. Some places are empty for a reason, and some things notice when you step into their space, even if you never see them.
I rented the cabin because I wanted quiet. That was the only reason. I had been tired for months, tired in a deep way that sleep never fixed. Work, traffic, noise, screens, people. I found the listing late one night and booked it without thinking much. A small cabin in the woods, 3 hours from the nearest city, no neighbors close by. The pictures showed a single-room place with a porch, a wood stove, and a lake a short walk away. It looked clean and plain. That was enough for me. The drive there took longer than I expected. The paved road slowly turned into gravel, then dirt. My phone lost service about 30 minutes before I arrived. Trees crowded the road so tight that the sky looked like thin blue strips above me. The forest felt heavy, like it was pressing in. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than in the pictures. It sat in a clearing with tall trees all around it. No fence, no other buildings, just the cabin, a wood pile, and a narrow path leading toward the lake. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. No birds, no wind, no insects. Just the sound of my own footsteps and the engine ticking as it cooled. The cabin smelled like old wood and dust when I opened the door. Everything inside was simple. A table, 2 chairs, a small bed, a stove, shelves with a few chipped plates and cups. There was a guest book on the table. I flipped through it but didn't read much. Most entries were short and normal. People talking about fishing, writing, resting. Nothing strange. I unpacked slowly. I remember feeling watched, but I told myself it was just nerves. Being alone does that. I walked around the clearing to get familiar with the place. The ground was soft with old leaves. I noticed boot prints near the side of the cabin. I assumed they were from the owner or past guests. I didn't think about them much at the time. That night came fast. The trees blocked most of the light even before sunset. I made a simple meal and ate it at the table. The quiet pressed harder once it got dark. Every small sound felt loud. The cabin popped and creaked as it cooled. I lay in bed listening to the woods. Sometime after midnight, I heard a sound outside. It was light, slow, like footsteps on leaves. I stayed still. I told myself it was an animal. The sound moved around the cabin, stopping, starting again. That was the easiest answer. Eventually, the sound stopped, and I fell asleep without meaning to. Into morning, I found muddy prints on the porch. They were fresh, bigger than mine. They stopped right in front of the door. I stood there staring at them for a long time. I felt stupid for being scared, but I also felt wrong for ignoring it. I checked around the cabin. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. The woods were still too quiet. I tried to enjoy the day. I walked to the lake. The water was dark and still, with no ripples. I sat on a rock and ate a snack.
I kept looking back at the trees. I had the strong feeling that someone knew I was there and had known from the moment I arrived. That thought stayed with me all day like a weight. That afternoon, I noticed something else. One of my car tires was low. Not flat, but losing air. He hadn't driven over anything sharp. I checked the others. They were fine. I told myself it was bad luck. Still, my chest felt tight. That night, I locked the door. I don't know why I hadn't done it the first night. I pushed a chair against it. I slept lightly. I woke up to the sound of wood scraping. Slow, careful, not random. It came from the side of the cabin. I held my breath. The sound moved closer to the window. I could hear breathing outside, slow and steady. It stayed there for a long time. Then it moved away. I did not sleep after that. In the morning, I packed my things. I decided to leave. I didn't care about the lost money or the plan to stay longer. I just wanted to go. When I tried to start the car, it struggled. I got out and opened the hood. A hose had been cut clean through, not torn. Cut. That was the moment I knew for sure that someone was doing this on purpose. Panic came in waves. I tried to stay calm. I went back inside and locked the door again. I checked for tools. There was nothing useful. No phone service, no radio. Just me and the woods and whoever else was out there. Hours passed. I stayed quiet. I watched the windows. Late in the afternoon, I saw movement between the trees. A shape, low and slow. It didn't rush. It didn't hide well either. It didn't need to. It knew I was trapped. I felt small and stupid and exposed. As it got dark, I realized I couldn't stay another night. I took the keys, a flashlight, and the heaviest piece of wood I could find. I left through the back door and moved into the trees, staying low, moving slow. The forest felt different at night, thicker, closer. Every step sounded too loud. I followed the dirt road on foot. I don't know how long I walked. My legs burned. My mouth was dry. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me, not close but steady, matching my pace. I did not turn around. I just kept going.
Eventually, I saw headlights.
A truck coming down the road. I stepped into the light without thinking. The truck slowed. I don't remember much after that, only the feeling of safety when I was no longer alone. The police went back to the cabin later. They found signs that someone had been living nearby for a long time. A hidden camp, tools, food. The boot prints matched. I went home after giving my statement. They never found the person. I threw away the clothes I wore there. I fixed my car. I slept with the lights on for weeks. Even now, I think about how quiet it was, how patient it felt. I understand something now that I didn't before. Some places are empty for a reason, and sometimes being alone is not the same as being safe.
I went to the cabin alone because I wanted quiet. That is the truth I keep coming back to. I wanted a place where nothing asked anything of me. The cabin sat deep in state land, miles from the nearest paved road, surrounded by pine trees so thick they blocked the sky. It was old but solid, built by someone who believed in doing things right the first time. Thick locks, heavy door, iron latch, small windows set high. I had rented it for a week in late fall, right before winter locked the area down. The listing said peaceful and remote, and it delivered exactly that. The drive-in took longer than expected. The road narrowed into gravel, then dirt, then something closer to a trail. Branches scraped the sides of my truck. The air smelled wet and sharp, like metal and leaves. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than the pictures. It leaned slightly downhill, like it had settled into the earth over time. The roof was dark with old moss. A stack of firewood sat under a tarp, weighed down with stones. No other tracks were around, just mine. Inside, the cabin was cold but clean. The floor creaked under my boots. Dust floated in the light from the small windows. There was a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves with old canned food left behind by someone else. I unpacked slowly, enjoying the quiet. No phone signal, no radio, just the wind moving through the trees and the soft sound of my own movements. The first night passed without trouble. I cooked simple food, lit the stove, and slept heavy. The silence felt deep but not threatening. I woke once to a branch hitting the roof, then slept again. In the morning, fog hung low, turning the forest into gray shapes. I made coffee and stood on the porch, breathing it in. Everything felt still. It was the second day when I noticed the first strange thing, a footprint near the woodpile that was not mine. It was faint, half filled with leaves, like it had been there before I arrived, but not long before. The tread was different from my boots. I told myself it was from the owner or a hiker passing through. People did come through these lands sometimes. Still, I felt a small tightness in my chest that did not go away. I spent the day hiking nearby, staying within sight of the cabin. The forest was dense and uneven. Fallen logs crossed the ground like bones. I saw no one. No fresh tracks. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in heavy and low. Snow started to fall, slow at first, then thick. By night, the cabin felt buried. The stove worked hard. The wind pressed against the walls. I slept lightly, waking often. On the third morning, the snow had stopped. Everything outside was white and clean, except for a line of footprints leading from the tree line to the side of the cabin. They were clear and fresh. They stopped near the back window. That window was small, just above shoulder height. I stood there for a long time, staring. My breath came out fast. I checked the window. No damage. No sign of entry. The prints did not continue past the wall. They simply ended, as if whoever made them had stood there and then stepped back into their own tracks. I tried to stay calm. I told myself there was a simple reason. Someone might have come by to check the property. Someone curious. Someone lost. But no note was left. No sign. The prints went back the way they came and disappeared into the trees. I spent that day inside. I kept the stove going and cleaned things that were already clean. I checked the door latch more than once. The quiet outside felt heavier now. Every sound stood out. Snow sliding from branches. A distant crack as a tree shifted. My own heartbeat in my ears. That night I did not sleep much. The wind picked up again. The cabin groaned and settled. At some point I heard a sound that did not fit. A dull thump, slow and heavy, against the side of the cabin. It happened once, then again, spaced out, like someone testing something. I stayed still on the bed, holding my breath, listening. The sound did not repeat. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. Into morning, I saw marks on the wall outside. Scrapes in the snow and dirt near the foundation. They were too wide to be from an animal. I walked the edge of the clearing and found more tracks. They circled the cabin. Whoever it was had taken their time. The thought settled in my gut, cold and sharp. I decided to leave. That choice felt clear and solid. I packed quickly. When I went to start the truck, the engine turned but did not catch. I tried again. Nothing. I lifted the hood and found the battery cable loose, not just shaken free, but pulled off. The metal clamp was bent. My hands shook as I fixed it. I kept looking over my shoulder. The forest felt closer than before. When the truck finally started, the sound felt too loud. I drove as fast as the road allowed, sliding once on the packed snow. I did not stop until I reached the paved road and saw other cars. I reported what happened. The ranger listened, took notes, and said they would check the area. A week later, I got a call. They had found signs of someone living rough nearby. A makeshift shelter hidden in a ravine. Cans, old clothes, tools. They believed the person had been watching cabins for supplies. They said it was not uncommon in that area, especially before winter. I never went back to that cabin. The ending of that trip stays clear in my mind. I left because I trusted the feeling that something was wrong. The fear was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and steady, built from small details that added up. The clear prints, the bent metal, the careful way someone had moved around the place where I slept. Nothing supernatural happened, not impossible things. Just another person, desperate and hidden, close enough to touch the walls while I lay inside. That knowledge sits heavier than any story about ghosts.
It reminds me how thin the line is between peace and danger when you are alone, and how important it is to leave when your body tells you to go.
I rented the cabin because I wanted to be alone and because it was cheap. It sat at the end of a long dirt road that cut through thick pine trees, the kind that block sound and light. The listing said it was remote but safe, recently cleaned, stocked with firewood, and used by hunters in the fall. It was late November, just before the real snow started, and I told myself that silence would be good for me. I had taken time off work and packed enough food for a week. I wanted to sleep, read, and let my head slow down. The drive there took longer than I expected. The road narrowed until branches scraped the sides of my car. Fallen needles covered the ground like a wet carpet. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than the pictures. It was a single-story wooden place with a metal roof, a small porch, and one window on each side. No other buildings were visible. The woods wrapped around it tightly, like they were trying to swallow it. There was no fence, no clear yard, just trees starting a few feet from the walls. Inside, the air smelled old, but not rotten. It smelled like dust, cold wood, and something faintly sour, like damp clothes that never fully dried. The floorboards creaked under my boots. There was a couch with faded fabric, a small table, a kitchenette, and a narrow hallway leading to a bathroom and one bedroom. Everything looked normal at first glance, too normal. Clean in a way that felt rushed, like someone had wiped surfaces but not really looked at them. I unpacked slowly, taking my time. The silence was heavy. No wind, no birds, no distant cars. Just my own movement and breathing. When I opened the fridge, it hummed loudly, the sound echoing off the walls. I noticed the lock on the front door was newer than the rest of the hardware. The screws were shiny, the metal unmarked. I told myself it meant the owner cared about safety. That first night, I slept badly. The bed was stiff and the quiet felt loud. Every small noise stood out. The house settled, wood popping as the temperature dropped. I kept waking up with the feeling that I had missed a sound, like my brain was waiting for something it could not name. When morning came, the light through the window was gray and weak. I spent the next day walking the nearby woods. There were no trails, just uneven ground and fallen branches. I noticed old footprints in the mud near the back of the cabin. They were not mine. The tread pattern was different. They looked recent, pressed deep, as if the ground had been soft. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at them, trying to tell myself they were from hunters or maintenance workers. I did not see any other signs of people. No trash, no tire marks beyond the main road. Back inside, I tried to distract myself. I cooked a simple meal, read a few chapters of a book, and wrote notes in a journal. The feeling did not leave. It stayed low and steady, like pressure behind my eyes. That night, I noticed the bathroom window was unlocked. I was sure I had checked it before. I locked it and tested it twice. On the third day, I found something that changed the way the cabin felt forever. I was looking for extra blankets in a small storage closet near the bedroom. Behind a stack of old boxes, I saw a narrow gap in the wall. It was not supposed to be there. I pushed one of the boxes aside and found a loose wooden panel. The wood was darker than the rest, worn smooth by touch. When I pressed it, it shifted inward slightly. I did not open it right away. I stood there, heart beating hard, listening. The cabin was still silent. Finally, I pulled the panel free. Behind it was a shallow space between the walls, just wide enough for someone to crouch. Inside, I saw flattened insulation, crushed like it had been pressed down again and again. There were small items scattered inside. A water bottle, empty. Food wrappers. A folded jacket that smelled sour and human. The smell hit me all at once, sharp and undeniable. My hands shook as he put the panel back. I cleaned nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the door. My thoughts raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Someone had been there. Maybe someone still was. The idea settled in my chest and made it hard to breathe. I checked every room carefully after that. I noticed things I had missed before. Scratches on the inside of the hallway wall, low and uneven. A small dark stain near the back door that did not look like rust. The pantry shelf was missing a can of food I was sure I had packed. My head tried to explain it away, but my body knew better.
That night I did not sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights off, holding my keys and listening. Hours passed slowly. Sometime after midnight I heard it. A soft sound from inside the walls. Not the house settling. Not the wind. A slow, careful movement, like fabric brushing against wood. It came from the hallway. I stayed completely still. My heart was loud in my ears. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. I did not look toward it. I focused on breathing quietly, evenly. The fridge clicked on, filling the room with noise, and the sound in the wall stopped again. When morning finally came, I waited until full daylight before moving. I packed fast, throwing things into my bag without caring how they fit. When I opened the front door, cold air rushed in. I stepped outside and froze. Near the porch, fresh footprints marked the ground. They circled the cabin. They came close to the windows. They did not go toward the road. I did not go back inside. I got into my car and drove. The road felt longer on the way out. Every shadow between the trees looked like a person standing still. When I reached a place with signal, I did not stop. I drove until I reached a town with people, noise and light. Later, after I reported everything to the authorities, they searched the cabin. They found more spaces in the walls. They found personal items that did not belong to me. They told me the cabin had been used before by someone who lived there without permission, hiding, watching, leaving and returning. No one ever found the person. The owner took the place off the market. I went home and tried to return to normal life, but the cabin followed me. I still noticed locks first. I still listened to walls. I understand now how easy it is for someone to be close without being seen. The fear was not of something unreal or impossible. It was the fear of another person choosing to stay hidden, close enough to hear me breathe, and waiting for the right moment that never came because I left when I did.